Howdy folks, this is Nathan Rourke with another lesson. Today we're going to be talking about our priorities in a survival or a crisis situation. This is a very, very important concept. It's more of a strategy than it is going to be a hands-on lesson today. And this is a lesson that I start all of my wilderness survival seminars with. It's called the Rules of 3 to 4. And what it does is it outlines our priorities as human beings in a crisis or a survival situation. Any type of situation where our stress goes up, where the severity of the situation is high, certain things happen and we need to know how to prioritize what we need to stay alive and keep our loved ones alive. So in the Rules of 3 to 4, what it does is it's going to break down our priorities on a time frame. And it's going to start with the 3 to 4 seconds. So crisis hits, survival situation ensues. You and your family are in a bad way. And what do we need to do in 3 to 4 seconds in order to stay alive? There's something we need to prioritize right away, and that is our minds. We need to calm down because panic is a killer. And panic in an urban situation, in a situation where you're around a lot of other people that could be scared, that could be running for their lives too, panic is going to be a very, very real killer. And so you need to know that you need to calm down. You need to know we need to get our head in the right space. You know, when we get scared, our brain kind of jumps into this sympathetic nerve system of fight, flight, or freeze. And those conditions, those reactions are very much instilled in us for 1.5 million years of living as hunter-gatherers. You know, they were survival mechanisms. They certainly kept us alive, that fight, flight, or freeze. But we need to move beyond that. We need to step outside of that initial box, and we need to engage our number one survival tool, and that's our brain. Our brain is what's going to get us in and out of these situations. It's going to allow us to maneuver through these crisis situations and keep our family safe and keep us alive. So in order to re-engage our brain, we need to step back outside of that sympathetic nervous system dump that happens when we get really scared, and we need to re-engage that brain. So let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about how the brain reacts in this crisis world. When we get scared and fear sets in, you know, certain things happen to our bodies. We increase our heart rate. We increase our respiratory rate. We get tunnel vision naturally in our brains. We lose the ability to do fine motor skills. And these are all things that we can train to overcome, but as a natural human being, just right off the bat, these are things that are going to happen to us. And we need to know that. We need to prepare for that. We need to acknowledge that that's happening. And we need to acknowledge that that initial dump of adrenaline in our system, it is a survival mechanism, but it's also something that can kill us. A great example I like to use when I'm teaching is several years ago, there was a group of kids at an outdoor education facility not too far from here, and they were out on a night hike, and they were moving through the forest in the dark, learning how to move in the dark without flashlights. And a young lady got separated from the group during that excursion, and she allowed panic to set in. Panic took over her brain, and rather than sitting down and thinking about what she should do, she just went into that flight mechanism, and she started sprinting through the forest in the dark, and she tripped and fell and hit her head pretty hard on a rock. It didn't kill her, thank goodness. You know, thankfully this turned out okay. It did hurt her. She had to go to the hospital, but that certainly could have been a death. It could have been a fatal mistake. It could have been panic induced fatality. And so that's a great example for us to think about. When we get scared, we have lots of perceived threats that are coming our way, things that we think are about to kill us, and then we have real threats, things that are about to kill us. And we need to learn how to differentiate those, stick to the known facts, stick to things that we know are dangerous, get back into our cognitive space of re-engaging the parasympathetic nervous system and get our body functions back in play and get our brain working, most importantly. Because if we're able to keep that brain in play, then we can engage that number one survival tool, and it's going to buy us time. Because our next rule of 3 to 4 is 3 to 4 minutes. So something happens, we're able to breathe, we're able to calm down. With that 3 to 4 second rule, we live past 3 to 4 seconds. And in that, because we've engaged our brains, we're able to do what I call a stoppa, S-T-O-P-A. So the first thing, stop. Unless there's something that's about to bite your head off right now, stop. Because in stopping, you can gain control of that panic response and re-engage the thought process. And that allows you to think. So S-T. So we're stopping and we're thinking. We're thinking about what's really going on. We're thinking about the priorities that we need to put in a list to get us out of this situation. We're thinking about the conditions of my family and loved ones around me. How are they doing? What do I need to do to get them in the right space to be able to successfully negotiate this crisis? And then if we stop, we think, we observe. O is observe. So we're observing what's going on around us. We're observing the resources we have at hand. We're observing the real threats that are coming our way. We're kind of taking those perceived threats and tucking them behind us because, we want to, again, stick to the facts, stick to what's real. That's what's going on right now. So we're observing all these things, gathering information. So that's S-T-O-P. We make a plan. And that plan is not something that I just put in my head. It's a plan that I create with my team, with my family, so that we're all on the same page. We're all moving ahead in the same direction. We all have the same goals in mind. And that puts us as a team moving forward, not as me as an individual leading a team. We're all collaborating and moving together as a team. So we create that plan, and no plan is good unless you, A, act on it. So by engaging that brain, we get to the stoppa. That buys us some time. It gets us moving in a positive direction. And A, act on that plan. Survivors are active people. They're proactive people. Survivors are not passive. They're not people that sit around and wait for things to happen. They're not people that sit around and wait for, government rescue crews to come in and rescue them. These are people that are going to be proactively moving towards a solution-oriented culture. And so you want to be part of that. You want to put that act into play, but you don't want to act without your brain being engaged. So we get through that 3 to 4 seconds, we develop a plan, and it buys us all the way up to 3 to 4 minutes. Now 3 to 4 minutes as a human being, there becomes another necessity, and that is we have to put oxygen in our body every 3 to 4 minutes, or else we're going to die. All right, and so our next priority as a human being is an open airway. So things like, are we underwater? Are we choking? Are we having a severe allergic reaction that's taking us to an anaphylactic condition? Is our airway swelling shut? Are we in any type of situation where gases are potentially going to occlude our airway, or are we going to be inhaling, poisons? So these are all things we want to consider. How is our airway doing? And so in this realm, there's the whole side of, is my airway occluded? But then there's the flip side of, hey, we need to get quality breaths coming into our body, not hyperventilation, panic breaths. We need to slow down. We need to get good absorption of O2. We need that oxygen to perfuse throughout our bodies. We need to be taking good, deep, conscious, intentional breaths to pull us down into that relaxation mode, but also to feed our body what it needs. Without oxygen, we're not much of an animal. It's something that all living things need, and especially us in survival situations. So some skill points that I want you to take away from this, and things that we will have lessons later on in, is go out and get certified in CPR. Learn how to breathe for a loved one or a family member that has an impediment of their airway. Learn how to get a choking victim, how to open up an airway from a choking victim. Learn how to identify and deal with severe allergic reactions that might occlude our airways. Learn lifeguarding, water rescue skills, because anytime you introduce water into a situation, we always have a chance of our airway becoming compromised and air becoming not available in that survival situation. So go out and get these trainings, or stay tuned. We'll have some more lessons later on about these things. But definitely seek that knowledge and seek that training so that you can deal with the next priority, which is 3 to 4 minutes, our 3 to 4 minute rule of getting airway in. And then also recognizing if our family or loved ones, if their airway is compromised or they're in a dangerous situation, how to help them or help someone else, help a stranger. Okay, so calming down, getting good quality breaths into our system, that's buying us quite a bit of time, because our next priority in the world of the rules of 3 to 4 is 3 to 4 hours. Okay, we go 3 to 4 seconds, 3 to 4 minutes, and now we're at 3 to 4 hours. And 3 to 4 hours, in the big picture, we would call it shelter. But my definition of shelter is maintaining our core body temperature at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And y'all, this is a crucial one, because the vast majority of people who die in a wilderness survival situation, or even in an urban survival situation, they're dying from something we call exposure. On their death certificate, that's what it says, exposure, which basically means they froze to death or they got too hot and died from overheating. This is a very real issue in any kind of life-threatening crisis survival situation, or even not, even on a family beach trip, or you guys are heading out on a boating trip, and you need to be aware of what it takes to keep our body core temperature safe and constant at that 98.6 range. Because as human beings, y'all, we're pretty fragile. Either if we go a little south of that or a little north of that, it's only a few degrees before we get into serious danger. And the first thing I want to talk about is hypothermia, which is getting too cold, meaning our body core temp is dropping below that 98.6 degrees. And just an idea of how fragile we are, at about 97 degrees to 96 degrees, of when our body core temp drops to that level, we're starting into that realm of long onset or mild onset hypothermia. We're starting, okay? We're starting down a dangerous road, because it drops off quickly from 96 degrees Fahrenheit. When our body core temp drops to about 94 degrees Fahrenheit, we start getting into real hypothermia. We're kind of in that moderate hypothermia from 94 to 92 degrees Fahrenheit. And after 92 degrees Fahrenheit, if your body core temperature gets that low and you don't have someone else to help you come out of that, you're gonna die. You're gonna freeze to death. And so that's just a few degrees of dropping, and that can happen pretty quickly. So exposure, it does take an hour, a couple hours, depending on the situation. If you're submerged in cold water, it could take less than an hour, depending on your body type and who you are and what kind of training you've received. It depends on your situation completely. But the bottom line is it's a very real threat. And so even if we move a little north and we're going into the hyperthermia world, we've all had a fever before. We've all felt crummy because our body core temperature was elevated in order to deal with some kind of internal stress going on, a virus or some kind of bacteria that our body is harboring. So we know what it feels like to have a fever, and we know how crappy that can make us feel. And we know that we can get, we can just have headaches, and we can feel like our brain isn't quite working, and we can feel just pretty much like we want to lay around and sleep all day long. And those are great things to have experience in, because we can begin to recognize what that heat exhaustion begins to look like, which then can lead to heat stroke, which then leads to death. What you need to realize is that, at 100 degrees, when our body core temperature reaches 100 degrees, we're not feeling very good inside. A low-grade fever doesn't feel good to any of us. And when that's induced by external elements, when we're just overheating because of the exposure element, that's a pretty serious situation, because if we don't remedy that early, it turns into a much more compounded and much more serious condition, heat stroke, and that leads to death. And so the idea there is as you recognize someone is climbing in heat, and there's all kinds of signs and symptoms we can get into in another lesson still yet, you want to cool them down. You want to get them into a cool place. You want to go ahead and get their body. You want to accentuate the evaporation process in their body of cooling. You want to get them in the right type of clothing to help them cool down. You want to remove them from the situation that's overheating them. But nonetheless, people do die of heat-related conditions every year in the United States. In fact, quite a few do. So hypothermia, hyperthermia, very real. In the rules of 3 to 4, we're talking 3 to 4 hours. If you walk into a snowstorm in your underwear, you're going to be dead. You're going to die of hypothermia in 3 to 4 hours. Your body cannot sustain, or the average person's body cannot sustain that amount of exposure, that amount of cold without the core temperature plummeting. And just so we're really clear, when I'm speaking of 98.6, I am talking about my body's core temp. The core temperature is that temperature that is where our vital organs rest, so the core temperature around our vital organs, around our brain, that's what we're trying to hold on to and maintain at 98.6. Right? Our ambient skin temperature on our extremities, that's usually sitting around 92 degrees. So don't get confused. It's not that my fingertips should be 98.6 degrees. It's normal for them to be a bit cooler. It's the core temperature, my life box, so to speak, where all my organs are living and operating. That's where I need to maintain that at 98.6. So how do we maintain it at 98.6, you ask? Well, shelter's a big concept. And it involves things like choices in clothing, which to me is your baseline of shelter. It involves things like being able to build what you might call shelters to keep you dry, to keep the wind from taking your heat away. It involves the ability to build and maintain fires and the whole realm of firecraft to increase that radiant heat back onto you. So shelter is a very large concept, and I do want to start by talking about clothing, because that's something we all need to know. Not all clothes are created equal, and you could very well either survive or be pushing up daisies at the end of a day-long crisis situation, determined basically on the clothes you chose to put on that morning. So let's talk about our clothing choices. The first things I want to talk about is material, clothing material. It's something we need to consider. Cotton. Cotton is hydrophilic. So the fiber of cotton is hydrophilic. It means it absorbs moisture. Cotton absorbs moisture in any kind of humidity. You can feel it kind of soak up moisture, and it likes to hold on to that moisture, and it's a real pain to dry out. And so when I sweat in a cotton t-shirt, that sweat gets soaked up into the cotton fibers and it stays there. And in fact, when it stays there, that cotton t-shirt starts sucking heat out of my body at such an accelerated rate that I would be better off with no clothes on at all if I was trying to stay warm than with wet cotton on. So cotton, in the woods we say cotton kills. If you choose to get up in the morning and wear only cotton in a woodland, temperate rainforest, or even alpine, all the way up to boreal northwoods or alpine environment, you're choosing a bad course, because that cotton can kill you if you get exposed to any kind of moisture and it starts dropping your body temp. And in a crisis situation, chances are that's going to happen, because in a crisis situation, you're going to start sweating a lot more. And that sweat's going to fill up every fiber of that cotton, and then it's going to start sucking heat out of your body, and you're going to become a much more likely candidate for hypothermia. All right? But that being said, cotton on the soccer field or cotton in a hot desert environment could be a wonderful choice because of that hydrophilic conductive nature, where it is holding onto that moisture and helping you cool down by pulling heat out of your body where you're in threat of overheating. So cotton could be helpful in those types of situations. So let's stay with the natural fibers. So let's go to wool. Wool, animal hair. Wool is a phenomenal natural fiber in the woods. It's one of my favorites. I love wool beyond any other natural fiber, honestly, because of several qualities. One is wool can absorb quite a bit of moisture before it loses its insulative value. So we've all heard that wool will keep you warm even when it's wet, and that's true. It's able to insulate because of the natural hair follicles in the natural fiber. It's able to maintain an insulative property long after it gets quite wet and keep you warm, and able for you to maintain that body heat while wearing wool. It traps it in. Another thing I love about wool is that it's fire retardant. And for someone like me that lives and works with fire a lot, I find myself in the woods. I'm cooking over fire, I'm sleeping around fire, I'm using fire to dry my clothing often. And wool is great because I don't have to stress about it catching on fire and flaming up. So I can sleep curled up around a small fire if I'm wearing all wool and feel really safe about that. So that's a great quality of wool. Wool is a little bit heavier, and wool does take a bit of time to dry out. So you need to be proactive about drying it out if it does get really wet. But wool's quite resistant to abrasion. It's very hardy. It also has some natural antimicrobial elements which help keep it from smelling really bad. That's a real boon. So I do enjoy wool. A lighter weight natural fiber that I want to mention real briefly is silk. You know, silk, it has a very wonderful feel next to the skin, yet it also has a natural wicking ability, meaning it's able to pull pull moisture away from your body and move it on to the next layer of clothing. And silk does insulate. It insulates better than cotton when it's wet, so it's a great natural fiber option if you're looking for silk. I often carry silk scarves with me because they're very lightweight, they're very comfortable around my neck, and they're able to help me maintain keeping body heat down in my layers by creating almost a gator-like effect around my neck to trap body heat in my clothing, to keep the billows effect from making my body heat come up around the loose hems of my clothing in the wintertime. So silk scarf can go a long way, but I also have worn silk-based layers and love them. Very comfortable, very good. So if we're going to step into the realm of synthetic fibers, we got to look at polyester first. A lot of polyester in outdoor clothing is out there, and a lot of polyester in our sports wear. So anything that says quick dry or wicking most likely has polyester. You know, in the outdoor world, you know about polypropylene, long underwear. We know about polyester fleeces, our pullover piled up fleece, good insulating layers. Polyester is great. It's hydrophobic. It doesn't like water at all. It helps pull water away from your skin and move it through, either to evaporate off into the environment or move it into your outer layers if you're wearing layers. So that whole idea of quick dry sportswear, that's what it's doing, is it's taking the moisture away from your body, quickly moving it through the clothing itself into an outside environment where it'll evaporate away. That's that wicking element. So polyester is great because it dries really quickly. It's lightweight. It keeps you warm even if it is wet. But the downfall in my mind of polyester, there's two things. One is that it's extremely flammable, and anyone who's spent any time with polyester around fire probably has lots of holes from sparks in their polyester clothing. And at the worst case scenario, it can catch fire and melt on you because it's plastic. And that can create a whole different first aid situation with burns that you have to deal with. So be aware of wearing polyester around fires. And the second thing that I don't like about polyester is it smells awful after wearing it for several days in the backcountry. It really holds on to bacteria and bacterial growth, and you really stink. And if that's something that bothers you, you should know that about polyester. So nylons, nylons are tough. The tight weave of nylon is really great for what I call an environmental layer, which is my outer layer. It helps keep wind from coming in and taking my heat away. It helps keep water off of me, keep me dry. And being dry, of course, is being warmer. So I like nylon on an outer layer, and we're going to talk about the layering system here in a minute. But I like nylon for the environmental or the outer layers, and there's all kinds of different nylons out there. A lot of them are treated with all kinds of things that helps it be more waterproof. But as far as a good solid outer layer to protect you from wind and water, I think nylon is hard to beat. So it's just a good thing to think about and know about. So now that we have a basic understanding of our more common fibers that make up our textiles and make up our clothing, let's talk about how we apply that. Dressing in layers. When you're waking up in the morning and you're going on a day hike with your family, you want to dress appropriately for the day. And around here, a day can go from being hot and sunny to thunderstorm and hypothermia weather like that, and you need to be prepared for that sort of temperature and weather fluctuation throughout the day. And so if I were to wake up and just put on a cotton t-shirt and a pair of cotton shorts and take off into the woods, I'd be setting myself up for disaster. In fact, the most cases of hypothermia that I deal with in my profession is in the summertime as a result of afternoon thunder showers. That's when I see hypothermia. I don't see it a lot in the wintertime. I have seen it in the wintertime, but I don't see it a lot in the wintertime because typically people are more prepared for cold weather in the wintertime. So, don't get caught in that trap when you're preparing for a hike with your family on a nice summer day. So wake up and think about layers. Think about, what am I putting next to my skin first and foremost? Well, my base layer is going to be something that is wicking, something that's going to pull moisture away from my body. So that's where we go into our polypropylenes, our polyester fabrics, our Under Armours, you know, our quick dries, our Nike athletic wear, all these things. Read the labels, y'all. Get out there and look at the tags on your shirts, see what they're made of. But what you want next to your skin, if you can stand it, is a good polyester base layer, because that's what's going to help wick moisture away. Now, I do want to tell you that they do make natural fiber wool base layers that are quite comfortable to wear next to your skin. Icebreakers is a company, an example like this. So, you know, they're making merino wool, non-itch wool that in a base layer fashion that you could put on in lieu of that polyester base layer. If you're an all natural fiber kind of person, go for it, because wool's going to do the same thing. It's going to help promote dryness and a warmth right next to your skin, which is what we're after. We want to get that moisture away from the skin as quickly as possible. Now, outside of that base layer, you're going to put on what we call insulating layers. And again, layers, layers, layers is what I'm talking about. When you're wearing layers, not only can you control your body core temp by either adding or removing layers, but also in a layered situation, you just have a lot more options as far as your protection goes. All right, so my insulating layers, I'm going to think about things that have loft and pile to them. So, you know, a nice thick wool sweater or a polyester fleece sweater. These are things I'm thinking about. I like to think about this idea of down. You know, I didn't mention down earlier, but down's worth mentioning. As a natural fiber, a natural insulation, down is a situation where my dogs are giving us a warning here.